Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our introduction to organizational communication. I cannot meet you personally today. However, I'm going to record our session for you also to get some gist in it regarding the introduction to organizational communication. This point, we will be discussing what is organization and what is also communication and what is organizational communication. There are three concepts that we need to learn out from this context. So again, I am Jumua Idiva. I'm your instructor for this course. Let's have the introduction to organizational communication. We'll be learning what is an organization for chapter 1, what is communication, the history of organizational communication, and approaches to organizational communication research. Let's talk and define first about organization. Many people have attempted to define what is meant by the word organization. Maybe nagtatanong din kayo, ano ba yung talagang kahulugan ng organization? Instead of following the suit and throwing yet another definition into mix, we've selected a number of definitions from the common dictionary definitions to ones used by business, by psychology, by economics, by communication scholars. So the table 1.1 discusses yung definition ng organization. And according to dictionary definition, organization is an act of organizing or the state of being organized. Or one ha, organized. It also be an organized structure or the whole, yung kabuuan niya. Kung sa business naman, it is a business or administrative concern united and constructed for a particular end. It's also a body of administrative officials. It's an organization. As of a political party, a government department, and etc. Another definition is that order or system, method, organization, and also that's according to English dictionary. In short, that the organization itself composes of many definitions. But in here, we'll be discussing the way how it is done, being organized as a business, as a body of administrative officials, and in order or system. We have this in our organization, we have this what we call as structures. Yung structure natin. The first major theme commonly seen in the various definition of the word organization has to do with what we call a structure. When we talk about how organizations are structured, we're talking primarily about how they function in terms of what happens both within an organization and how an organization actually functions within its external environment. Meron tayong within, internal, meron din naman tayong external. For our purposes, we will look at the structure in terms of four basic processes. We have this external environment, we have the input, we have the throughput, and we have the output. We will discuss one by one. Yung external environment, this factor actually consider when thinking about an organization that is external. It consists of all the vendors, competitors, customers, and other stakeholders who can have an impact on the organization itself, but exist outside the boundaries of the organization. Ibig sabihin doon, sila yung the external part. Meron tayong organization, sila yung mga customers natin. Sila yung mga vendors natin. Sila yung mga competitors ng organization natin. Because from the term itself, external, it's outside of your organization. For example, image that the government is going to post a new regulations on your industry. These new regulations will have an effect on how the organization must function. We often refer to two different types of boundaries. The organization that has open boundaries allows for the free flow of information to the organization and is more likely able to adapt to the changes. Halimbawa, kung may i-mandate ang ating gobyerno when it comes to fishery, when it comes to lending organization, when it comes to this particular organization. So the open boundaries actually has the flow to accept that, either to accept or either not. Pag sinabi naman natin closed boundaries, on the other hand, occur when an organization tries to insulate itself from what is occurring with its environment. When an organization has closed boundaries, the organization ends up being less aware of what is going on. Kasi closed nga sila. They're not open to some particular changes that may refer when it comes to the organization itself or even to the environment or to the external environment. Ibig sabihin, pag yung external environment natin, dalawang konsepto din yon. Remember, outside, di ba? Dalawang konsepto din yon, that there is an open boundaries and there is also a closed boundaries. If we try to get to the definition in it, mas advantage yung open boundaries because they have all the access of what is happening outside. Knowing that your competitors have really good strategies in the market, so the organization also has to level up. Your organization itself has to level up in order to adapt what is happening outside para magpatuloy ang inyong organization. Okay? I hope naintindihan natin yun. Pangalawa, we have this what we call as input. The next major aspect of an organization's environment involves inputs. Inputs are those resources that an organization brings in from the external environment. Mula sa external environment, ipapasok natin sa ating organization. Brings in. Typically, resources can be discussed in three general categories: the physical materials, the people, and also the information. First, organizations bring in physical materials that is needed to accomplish its goals. Whether it's computers, di ba mag-input tayo, desk, light, fixtures, or supplies necessary to build silicon and any other aspect. So, ibig sabihin sa inyong organization, of course naman sa isang organisasyon, kailangan natin ng mga facilities. And that it's outside of our external environment. And these factors will bring in, ilalagay natin, kasi input tayo. Hindi gagana yung mga organization natin pag wala din tayong mga physical materials. Pag wala tayong people, yung manpower. Pag wala din tayong information kung ano yung nangyayari sa labas. Kung generate ba ang ating organization. Kung magiging effective ba din ang ating organization. And that is what the input is telling us about the physical materials, about the people or your manpower, and about the information getting from the external environment. Ibig sabihin, nag-connect-connect ito mula sa external environment papunta sa yung input. Remember that external environment focuses on the customers. Diba? Kung balikan natin siya, it talks about the customers, it's about vendors, it's about competitors, it's almost everything outside na ating pinasok. That's why input. Pinasok natin. Okay? Pangatlo, we have this throughput. Is ultimately what an organization does with inputs within the confines of the organization itself. Throughput can range from the used physical materials, people, and information to how organizations structure themselves internally to create goal-oriented throughput. While we cannot discuss every possible way an organization can utilize inputs, we should note that the issue of the external organization structure is very important at this level of an organization. For this reason, we really must discuss the two ways that organization commonly structure hierarchies. So, ibig sabihin, kung meron ka ng manpower dito, meron ka ng information mula sa labas, at meron ka din ng mga physical materials, pwede ka nang gumawa, pwede mo nang laguin, pwede mo nang trabahuin ang iyong organization. Kasi meron ka ng, palagay natin, meron ka ng president or meron ka ng manager, meron ka ng finance aspect, meron ka na dito sa information aspect, meron ka na dito sa utility. So meron ka na. Kaya mo na siyang i-create in order for you to have a creation of your goal-oriented throughput. Or tinatawag natin, meron kayong goal kung ano at para saan yung magiging organization ninyo. The last one is we have the output. The final aspect related to organizational structure is input, which is output, which is the ultimate product of service that an organization disseminates back to the external environment. Whether one is create the components of a cell phone or sending computer technicians to people's home, every organization is designed to produce some kind of service or product for the external environment. Even nonprofit organizations like the American Red Cross are producing a range of both products and services for the external environment. The output speaks kung ano na yung magiging kakalabasan, ano yung magiging resulta ng inyong goal. Mula sa ating external environment, papunta tayo sa input natin, nagkaroon tayo ng throughput. So lahat ito nakaplano, nagkaroon na kayo ng plano, nagkaroon na kayo kung anong gagawin ninyo. So here comes the output as the final aspect. Kung ang inyo pang napagplanuhan, marirealize niyo na ba? Mabibigyan na ba siya ng buhay? Mabibigyan na ba siya ng pagkakataon na to explore and even to market outside? Okay, so those four things are really important in the organization. We have also this one. We call this one as dialectical tensions. So is what the organization needs or wants. Tapos, what workers need or want. Diba, meron tayong people, meron tayong manpower. So, pag sinabi natin sa organization, totoo to, minimize cost. Kasi wala naman sigurong organization nila, gastos ka lang ng gastos. Of course, you need to minimize para may profit din kayo at the end of the day. What workers need or want, iba din. Maximize the salary, benefit package. So of course, you are demanding because you are a manpower that employee kanila. So you need to demand also about your benefit, about your salary. Sa organization naman, about systematize of job duties. So ito yung job opportunity, ito yung job descriptions mo. As a manager, ito yung gawin mo. As a assistant manager, ito yung gawin mo. As utility, ganito yung mga roles mo. So what workers need? Autonomy to do one's job. Ibig sabihin, meron siyang sariling paraan kung paano niya yan gawin. However, of course, susunod pa rin tayo. So what is the body had agreed or ano yung gusto talaga na COO ninyo or CEO ninyo when it comes sa paglago ng business, sa paglago ng organization. Another one, we have also ability to streamline the organization. Of course, yung worker natin, job stability. Diba? Mas maganda talaga pag stable tayo sa trabaho, hindi tayo contractual. Ang what organization naman about agreement, dissent, transparency, privacy, conventionality, innovation. Organization focused, self-focused pagdating sa mga workers. Permanence, of course, gusto nila ng change kasi siguro hindi na gusto ng pamamalakad, so gusto nila ng pagbabago. So normal talaga yan. Rights of the organization, rights of the individual. Work life, and social life. Ano ibig sabihin ng dialectical tensions dito? Ang nagkakaroon talaga ng tension when it comes also to the relationship within the organization and also of the worker. That's why nga meron tayong tinatawag na kontrata. Na kung saan both parties agreed to what is the vision of the organization and what is also the goal or yung trabaho talaga ng ating mga worker. When you're having the contract, safe kayo both. Okay? Because you both agreed to what should be done inside or even outside the organization. Types of organization. There are many types of organization. The last factor in understanding organization is to realize that there are numerous types of organization. For a good overview of the different taxonomies that have been created, trying to categorize these different types of organization. The first one is mutual benefit associations. The first type is mutual benefit organization, which is focused on providing for its membership. Some examples are political parties. Yan, meron tayong mga political parties, lalo na ngayon, coming na yung election. Unions, siguro meron din kayo dito, sumasali din kayo. Fraternal associations, mutual yon. Clubs, veterans, organizations, professional associations, and religious sects. So, mutual benefit association ang tawag natin doon. People generally join these types of organization because of the benefits of the membership. When this organization are first created, organizational members are generally very involved kasi mutual nga. Hindi lang yung mga officers, but also the members are involved in the creation of the organization. However, once one of these organizations has been around for a while, the majority of the members become passive and let the minority run the organization. So that's also the downside of it. But maganda din ito mutual benefit association because both parties kayo talaga mutual understanding. We also have these business concerns. The second type of organization is the business concerns organization, which is focused on doing well for the organization itself. According to Blow and Scott, the dominant problem of business concerns is that of operating efficiency, the achievement of maximum gain at minimum cost in order to further survival and growth in competition or competition with other organizations. Kasi nga, kailangan ito na survive. Business tayo eh. So, sino bang gusto malugi? So, competitive. Diba? Competitive tayo when it comes to business concerns. Wala naman siguro ang organization na gustong malugi. Gusto talaga, of course, we wanted to have the goal na magiging successful tayo. So, ang primary focus dito is to make the organization very alive. Business tayo. Next is service organizations. According also to Blow and Scott, service organizations are one whose prime beneficiary is the part of the public in direct contact with the organization, with whom and on whom its members work. In short, an organization whose basic function is to serve the clients. So dito naman, service organization can include social work agencies, mga hospitals, mga schools, legal aid societies, and mental health clinics. When it comes to school, ito yun siya. Hindi taxable, if I can still remember well, hindi taxable yung school, lalo na yung private school. Okay? In not taxable because it's a service. It's a service organization. Meron silang mga agencies when it comes to social work. Meron silang mga advocacy when it comes to hospital. Meron sila about mental health clinics. So these are all about service, giving the service. The basic problem service organization face is the problems associated with the conflict between professional service also with the customers. Yun lang. Next, we have also common will organization, where the prime beneficiary is the public at large. Maramihan. Public at large. Some examples of common will organizations include the State Department, yan, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, BIR, military services, police and fire departments, and even about DepEd, and also research functions kasi at large, malakihan. All of these organizations were created because they represented areas where the general public needed some level of protection or knowledge of the organization, services, administrative purposes of the government. So that's why meron tayong DOH that focuses on the health, DPWH that focuses on the highways. If you have seen that one, it's a public at large, malakihan. Overall, the crucial problem posed by the Commonwealth Organization is the development of democratic mechanisms whereby they can be externally controlled by the public. Yan ang yung naging problema, lalo-lalo na pagdating natin sa mga corruptions. Diba? It's really rampant because it's large. Magiging malaking amount din ang makukuha nila. Okay, so key takeaways dito. When one analyzes a variety of definition of the term organization, three common themes tend to emerge: the structure, the goal, and the people. Take note, the structure, the goal, and the people. Organizational structure examines how an organization really functions both internally and which larger external environment. Yun sa ating mga vendor, yung external environment natin, yung input natin, yung throughput natin, tapos yung output, yun. The goal is the general purposes or purpose group of people is trying to achieve. Lastly, the people refer to the various internal and external stakeholders. The term is stakeholders associated with the organization. But it doesn't only mean with the stakeholders, but also with the members, stakeholders and the members, and members that could also be the stakeholders themselves. There are four common organizational types, remember? The mutual benefit, the business concerns, the service, and the common will. So may kanya-kanya silang examples. Mutual benefit organizations are designed to help the individuals who belong to the group, fraternities, sororities, clubs, at iba-iba pa. Business naman, concerns organization are primarily concerned with the turning a profit. Dapat may ginansya, may return of investment for the organization and its stakeholders. Example, Walmart, Citibank, mga bangko, to your local grocery store or restaurant. The third organization naman, service organization, which includes the hospital, legal aid societies, and remember, they provide a specific service to people within society. And last one, commonwealth organization are those that are generally run by the government for the greater good of the society. Large public at large. Military, fire, police department, Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Public Highways, o ano pa DSWD at large. They are called commonwealth organization. Okay, now that we're done defining what is really an organization, it's an act of organizing, it's a member, it's part of the body. So, we will now go to, dito naman tayo sa tinatawag natin, communication. Because in communication, bakit pa kailangan natin yung communication? Of course, in communication, we need that one. It actually helps us to communicate with other people and make it also possible in giving, in giving our resources and giving our communication with them. For the purposes of this book, we define human communication as the process whereby one individual or group of individual attempts to stimulate meaning in the mind of another individual or group of individuals through intentional use of verbal, pwedeng salitaan, non-verbal, pwede din naman palitan ng mga letters, yung mga formal or business letters, or di kaya mediated messages. So, isa-isahin natin. Meron tayong tinatawag na basic model communication. This basic model of communication provides a general representation of what this model looks like within a public speaking context, but can easily be applied to other communicative contexts. Example dito, yung interpersonal communication, may pag-uusap sa isang small group o di kaya team communication. Kaya sa ginagawa ninyo kung magkakaroon kayo ng project, of course, you are exchanging ideas. You're actually making a communication in order to come up with a goal, in order to come up with something great that will be explored outside with our external environment. Let's briefly break this definition and model down into four core areas that must be understood: process, source, message, channel, and receiver. Pag sinabi nating process, first and foremost, it is important for anyone studying communication to remember that communication is a process. Process naman talaga yan. Mula sa sinasabi ko sa inyo, nasisend dyan sa brain ninyo, nag-stimulate, tapos nagbibigay kayo sa akin ng response. What I asked, then you need to give an answer. Therefore, it's a process, which indicates that there are no distinct beginnings to communication nor ends. Diba? Walang katapusan. Kung magtatanong, sagot. Yan, palitan. By process, we mean that communication is a series of interactions that alter with time and produce changes in those involved in the interactions. We should also mention that there are many external factors that can influence the process as well. The success or failures of informative or persuasive attempts can alter how people interact with each other in future interactions. Because there are some factors na yung sinend na message ay iba yung reception, iba yung pagkakasagap. Especially when you are actually reading, when you're having a chat. Baka soft lang yung pagkakalagay, pagkasulat niya. But in your perception, kasi nga galit ka ngayon, so yung pagkabasa mo sa message niya, galit din. So that starts yung conflict, diba? Failure of the message. In essence, there are a number of factors that are constantly at play within an interaction that affect the communication process. Pangalawa, yung source. Ang source is the individual or group individual attempts to simulate meaning. To help us understand the role of the source, we look at the two major components here, individual or the kaya group message. So ako yung source. Ako yung source sa information na binibigay ko sa inyo ngayon. So since I'm the source, so I need also the information that I'm going to share it to you. Kung marami kami, so magiging group ang message namin. Okay, so it's a simple understanding. I am your source now because I'm giving you the lecture, I'm giving you the information that you need when it comes to organizational communication. Hanggang sa punta tayo sa individual versus group. We refer to this position in the basic communication model as either an individual, ako, o di kaya grupo, because depending on the communicated context, the source of a message could represent a single person's ideas, maaring coming from the CEO himself or coming naman from the department of organization itself. Kung i-context natin sa university ninyo, maaring individual mula sa president ng inyong university, inyong college, tapos mula or di kaya mula mismo sa ADSCO itself. Nakuha ninyo as a group, as an organization. So, organization of women, mula sa kanila as a group yon. For example, if you're providing an employee feedback about her or his job performance, the message you're sending may come from you and you alone. So, halimbawa, ako yung CEO. Gusto kong malaman, magbigay kayo sa akin bigay kayo sa akin ng feedback form ninyo about your performance, about the performance of the company, or about the performance of the organization. Mula sa akin yon. However, if you are the CEO of the corporation delivering a press conference, your message may be coming out of your mouth but may represent dozens of individuals involved in crafting of the message. Kung nakikita ninyo, yung si director, yung sa Department of Health, Secretary, I mean, si Doke. Doke ba yun? I'm not sure with that, ha? Laki pa si Doke yun siya before. So, si Doke doesn't represent only himself, but he represents the entire Department of Education. Iba yung ikaw lang mismo. Iba din yung you are holding the company. Because even if ikaw lang yung nagsasalita, but you are representing the whole group of the organization. I hope that sounds clear to everyone. Furthermore, in the position as a CEO, you'd also be viewed as the mouthpiece of the organization. So anything you say is also attributed to the organization. Kaya nga, di madaling maging CEO, hindi madaling maging presidente. Because you are judged not as a person, but as a whole itself. Di ba? Maging representa ka na ng thousands of people. Next tayo, we have the message here. The idea someone is trying to send to a receiver is the message. We refer to the transmission of a message from the source to the receiver as stimulating meaning. Ito mga ginagawa ko, kung meron kayong binabasa na message, binabasa kayo ng mga letter, that's the message itself. Ikaw lang yung nagdadala. Ikaw mismo yung person na nagtatransmit ng mensahe. At ang mensaheng iyon ay i-channel. A channel, which means by which a message is carried from one person to another. So gaya sa nangyayari natin ngayon, ako yung person kasi ako yung nag-represent as an instructor, isisend ko sa inyo, so nag-channel yon. Ngayon pa-channel yon, pupunta yon sa inyo for you to have what we call as response. Pero there are two ways. Meron tayong verbal, ito yung ginagawa natin. Meron din naman tayong non-verbal, ito yung sinusulat. Ito yung mga business letters. Ito yung mga gestures, ito yung mga looks. Di ba? Pag happy ka, nag-happy ka, smile. Diba? Pag galit ka, kahit hindi mo sinasabi na galit ka, but your facial expression is really angry. So, it's really angry ka talaga. So, ibig sabihin doon, with your gestures, with your looks. Diba? O di kaya, pag hindi mo lang sinasabi, but your attire speaks that you are madam na madam. You are the President of the United States of America. So parang pag ganun ka, di ba? Non-verbal mismo, masasabi mo na, strict naman siya. Halang doon, mukha niya siya. So that's non-verbal. Iba din yung verbal kasi that's what we're doing. We're exchanging communication to each other. And of course, may JTED. Ito yung bagay yung nag-filter. A mediated message is any message that is sent using some kind of technology, either print form, auditory, visual, electronic. So, for example, dito mula sa email, mula sa Skype, mula sa Twitter, mula sa LinkedIn, mula sa vlogs, and anyone that using actually technology. So, mediated yung tawag natin. And then, after na to, nakuha na lahat, punta na tayo sa last part, which is the receiver. Ikaw na yung pinakahuli. So, as the receiver, so kung nakuha mo yung tamang channel, tamang pag-send ng mensahe, so therefore, you are also going to give the responses as the receiver. Key takeaways regarding about communication. Human communication is the process whereby one individual or group of individuals attempts to stimulate meaning in the mind of another individual through intentional use of verbal, non-verbal, and mediated messages. Pag sinabi kong verbal, the way we speak, it's really vocal. Non-verbal, it could be in letter, it could be in gesture. Mediated messages, that those are all electronics. Email, the blogs, ano pa ba, the Twitter, the Facebook, and a lot more. The basic model of communication examines four basic components. The source, ikaw, o kaya ako, or group of individual, mensahe, binigay mo, itcha-channel yan, baga kung sa kuan pa, nagdaga na siya, then ikaw, pagdating mo receiver. The source of a message is the individual or group who is originating an idea and attempting to transmit the idea to another person or persons. The message is the idea that is attempting to be transmitted, na ita-transfer. The channel is the specific method of communication an individual uses to convey a specific message. It could be verbal, it could be non-verbal, and it could also be mediated. And lastly, the receiver is the individual who is targeted from a message, who receives the message and then has to make a sense of the message itself. And that is about communication. So meron tayong organization that represent our whole text, tapos meron tayong mga communication ngayon. So paano naman pagsamahin natin yung organization at saka communication? We call that one as organizational communication. Tama po ba? And in order for us to learn, I want you to view this. What is an organizational communication? Ano ba yung kaibahan niya when it comes to organization? Yung meaning niya, meron bang pagkakatulad? Pagdating din sa communication, may pagkakatulad ba din? So therefore, let's have to look for this. What is an organizational communication? So I'll be sharing this one to you. You can get your notebook. You can also get your pen to take notes, some important details for you to learn what is really the context of this organizational communication.
So what is organizational communication? And what are we doing when we study organizational communication? I want to try and answer these questions from two different perspectives. First, we can talk about organizational communication as the communication that happens within organizations. That is, all the communication activity you'll see if you go to any organization today. Sending emails, writing memos, talking on the phone, having meetings, and more meetings, teleconferencing, video conferencing, speeches, presentations, and so on. This is a more conventional approach, and I think it's what comes to mind when people initially think of organizational communication. But I want to go deeper. I want to introduce an alternative, more sophisticated approach of seeing organizations as communication. This can radically change how we understand human interaction in organizational life, and it opens up exciting new possibilities for research and practice. But first, let's say a bit more about the conventional approach to organizational communication, which focuses on communication within organizations. This perspective sees the organization as something like a container, and communication is what flows within the container. If we extend the metaphor, we can see how communicating is then shaped by the structure of the organization, in the same way that liquids take the shape of their physical containers. And by the shape of the container, we can mean the physical shape of the organization, like if you have to take the elevator up 10 floors to deliver a report to your boss, or more of a symbolic shape, like where you are in the organizational hierarchy and how this influences the way you communicate with other organizational members. The key here is that the organization is seen as something that exists separately from communication. So communication is quote unquote organizational when it happens within these separate structures we call organizations. This relates to what scholars call an informational view of communication, because communication is all about transmitting information throughout the container of the organization. And quote unquote ineffective communication or communication breakdowns are seen as technical problems. The right information didn't get to the right people in the right manner. Someone didn't get the memo, as people like to say. And this is important stuff. It's how the work of organizations gets done, from small businesses and multinational corporations to nonprofits and government agencies. If organizations don't communicate the right information to the right people at the right times in the right ways, things fall apart. Directions aren't followed, customers aren't satisfied, clients aren't served, regulations aren't obeyed. General chaos ensues. And in certain high-risk organizations, like our military or your local fire department, getting the right information to the right people is absolutely critical. So, we certainly need effective communication within organizations. But again, I want to go deeper, beyond this conventional view of organizational communication. Because as important as this conventional view is for the day-to-day operations of organizations, I just don't think this view fully captures the complexities of organizing and communicating in our society. In a perfect world, we could create more efficient structures of information sharing so that the right people would always have the right information, and miscommunication would be a thing of the past. But a funny thing happened on the way to communication paradise. Turns out, different people interpret the exact same message very differently. That people can be deceptive in their communication, and their motives are incredibly difficult to figure out. That the meaning of language changes depending upon the context. And that what you don't communicate is often more important than what you do communicate, or that what you say is often much less important than how you say it. And that people often, if not usually, communicate for many other reasons than to just transmit information. And these are not just aberrations. This is the normal state of affairs for human interaction. Why is it, after all, that quote-unquote communication problems are continually mentioned as one of the main difficulties for most organizations? Is it just that people aren't getting the right information? Well, if so, this is merely a technical problem that should improve as we develop new ways to get better information to more people more efficiently. But it seems like almost the opposite is happening. That the more sophisticated our communication technologies have gotten over the years, the more communication problems we actually have. Now, why is that? Perhaps it's because there is more going on with communication than just transmitting information. So, in contrast to the first approach of communication within organizations, I want to offer an alternative, more sophisticated approach to organizational communication. Organizations as communication. But this means we have to think very differently about both communication and about organizations. Instead of viewing communication as merely the transfer of information, this second approach goes deeper and sees communication as the fundamental process that shapes our social reality. Communication is not just about transmitting already formed data between senders and receivers, but rather a complex process of continually creating and negotiating the meanings and interpretations that shape our lives. Scholars call this a constitutive view of communication, because communication literally constitutes or makes up our social world. More on this later. Additionally, this second approach of seeing organizations as communication questions the very notion of organization in the first place. The first approach of communication in organizations assumes there is this thing called organization that exists, and we just focus on the communication that happens inside. But what exactly is this thing called organization? Where did it come from? Organizations aren't natural. They don't just exist in nature like trees and mountains and rivers. They're created by people, and people have different values and motivations and abilities and resources. So organizations are never just neutral structures that exist apart from human activity. They are the visible manifestations of human activity, of communication. And so at their core, organizations are communicative. Think about it. An organization is essentially an ongoing collection of interactions, decisions, messages, interpretations, symbols, agreements, contracts, relationships, and so forth. There's nothing else there that exists apart from communication. Well, let me qualify that just a bit. Certainly there are other material or physical things there, like buildings, cubicles, computers, and other equipment, and these things help make up the organization. But these things have no inherent meaning apart from human interaction, nor can they have any impact in the real world apart from the choices we make through communication. Similar, the outcomes of communication definitely have consequences in the material world. For example, you might be thinking, hey, if I get laid off, it's not just a matter of perception, it's not just talk. There's a stark reality I have to face. Yes, but how the decision to lay you off was made and the meaning of that decision, whether seen as cost-cutting efficiency or ruthless bottom-line thinking, and how you make sense of this event are all matters of communication. And the accumulation of these communication processes are what make organizations what they are. I'm not suggesting that organizations exist in an imaginary land of perceptions and symbols and wishful thinking, like the material world doesn't matter, it's all in your mind. No. This constitutive perspective of organizations as communication is very much rooted in the material world of things and stuff. But what I am suggesting is that these material things come together and have meaning as an organization only through communication, thus leading us to the conclusion that organizations exist as communication.
Mabuhay! My name is Mike Yan, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of ManyChat. I'm really excited to invite you to a special event for you guys in the Philippines. We're having the first ever Philippines Online Instagram Summit this November 19th going to the 21st. This 3-day summit will show you how to get started with Instagram chatbots, how to set up your first DM automation, how to grow followers and get higher conversion rates without spending on ads. Click the link anywhere on this video and join us for free. This is the first of its kind online event we're launching in Philippines, specifically made to help you take advantage of this huge trend with chatbots for Instagram. If you've always been manually chatting with your followers or never used DM because it was too hard to do, this is the event that you don't want to miss. Best of all, it's free. During this summit, our speakers will share their special strategies and case studies which you will be able to use for your business immediately. 1 billion people are using Instagram, and we will show you how to stand out from the competition and convert likes and comments into actual sales with Instagram chatbots. Click the link below to register for the free Instagram Summit that will teach you everything you need to know to get started. I'll see you soon.
And my argument is that the second approach, organizations as communication, is a much better perspective to guide our study of organizational communication. Now, of course, we need effective communication within organizations. That's a given. But if we limit ourselves to only this perspective, we miss important opportunities for deeper insights and understanding. But why complicate things with a more sophisticated approach? After all, conventions become conventional for good reason, and conventional views have a lot of practical value. What do we gain with an alternative approach? I'm sure by now there are some objections in favor of the conventional view of communication within organizations I described earlier. After all, the container metaphor seems to describe how most of us actually experience organizational communication much of the time. And the physical reality of organizations, buildings, computers, stuff like that, seem to reinforce the conventional view. So what's wrong with this approach? Well, when we just focus on communication within organizations, based on that informational view of communication, we're taking what a colleague of mine at the University of Colorado calls a flat earth approach towards communication. What I mean by a flat earth approach is a perspective that seems correct from a limited vantage point because it works for much of our day-to-day lives, but ultimately it fails to account for the complexity of a situation. For much of human history, we got by just fine thinking that the Earth was flat, even though it was always round. And even with our 21st century sophistication, where we know the Earth is round, most of us can actually get by with flat Earth assumptions much of the time. But what about when things get more complex? If you want to put a satellite into space or take a transcontinental flight, flat Earth assumptions aren't going to be very helpful. Remember in elementary school when you compared a globe to a map and realized, for example, that it's much quicker to fly from New York to Moscow by flying over the North Pole instead of across the Atlantic? What seems counterintuitive from a flat Earth perspective actually makes perfect sense from a round Earth perspective. And the same is true with communication. We can get by with quote-unquote flat Earth assumptions about communication for much of what we want to do throughout our day. Much of our communication involves sending and receiving relatively unproblematic messages and acting on that information, giving directions, planning our schedules, requesting information, and so on. And the conventional informational approach towards communication works just fine in these situations. But other times things are a bit more complex. Like when you need to resolve conflict with a close friend or family member, or when you have to share bad news with someone you care about, confront someone about a wrongdoing, or you need to mediate a dispute. There's so much more going on in these situations than merely exchanging information. You are actually engaged in a complex process of meaning negotiation and social construction. In these situations, you have to do much more than think about what information you want to exchange. You actually have to think about the social realities you're creating. What might seem intuitive from a conventional flat Earth approach to communication, like expressing what you think or trying to control information, may actually work against you because it constitutes a social reality that produces unfavorable outcomes. And this is especially true within the context of organizations. Sure, much of what goes on in organizations is the transmission of messages between senders and receivers. But what about implementing a large-scale organizational change, or navigating the politics of an organization, or persuading skeptical leaders about the merits of a new idea? If you've ever been involved in any of these activities, you know you quickly run up against some organizational complexities that make the mere transmission of information inadequate to successfully accomplishing your goals. Things like power, identity, gender, ideology, or worldview, ethnicity, culture, and so forth are the quote-unquote round Earth complexities of the organizational landscape that call for a much more sophisticated understanding of communication. And these complexities need to be accounted for if we are to have a good understanding of organizational communication. So this has to do with our approach to communication, either as a thing that happens within organizations or a social process that actually constitutes organizations and organizational realities, and our corresponding approach to organizations, either as relatively neutral containers that exist apart from communication, or as contested sites of power, resources, and strategies that converge into recognizable forms we call organizations. Now, I certainly recognize the importance of the conventional approach to organizational communication, communication within organizations based on an informational view of communication. But I'm trying to push us to a deeper, more sophisticated understanding of organizational communication, organizations as communication based on a constitutive view of communication. The point then is that a constitutive view of organizations as communication enables us to question and investigate key organizational realities, not just accept them as given. We can question the existence of the organization, its structure, its forms of power, its guiding assumptions, its norms of operations, and so on. If these organizational features are not natural, but rather came into existence through specific communication processes, then we can examine the implications of those communication processes and explore ways of communicating that lead to more favorable organizational outcomes for more people. We can examine, for example, how certain patterns of interaction give rise to norms of conflict resolution, or how the taken for granted values of a particular industry or sector shape the practice of leadership, or how interpersonal dynamics affect the success of an organizational change initiative. We can look at how certain views of masculinity or femininity are connected to communication practices, or how our very identities are often created and sustained through organizational communication. We can uncover hidden forms of power and control that are embedded within communication processes. We can explore ways to make organizations more equitable and representative by surfacing alternative voices. We can figure out how to make organizations more productive, adaptive, and responsive through organizational communication that encourages innovation and collaboration. Whatever the case, a constitutive view of organizations as communication provides a much stronger explanatory framework to understand the complexities of organizing and communicating. What I'm advocating, therefore, is a communicative approach to our understanding of organizations. Organizational communication is all about taking a communication perspective to the study of organizations, exploring organizations through the lens of communication. Communication is not the thing to be explained. Communication actually provides an explanatory framework from which to understand the complexities of organizational life. Of course, our natural tendency is to relapse back to the conventional view, the container metaphor, communication within organizations, because it seems simple and intuitive from a limited perspective. But I'm trying to push us towards a deeper understanding, a perspective that better accounts for the complexities of organizing and human interaction. So what is organizational communication? And what are we doing when we study organizational communication? Communication is quote-unquote organizational, not just because it happens within organizations, but rather because it coordinates the activities and interpretations of multiple people into an organized, recognizable form and sustains or alters this form for subsequent collective action. To study organizational communication, therefore, is to study the fundamental social processes that create and sustain the dominant structures of our society.
Okay, there you go. That is about the organizational communication. So I have something also to read in here, an additional input also when it comes to organizational communication, which tells us about the relationship, yung bakit tinatawag na organizing communication. Maybe of the context that there is really an organization on how we approach and how we give communication to somebody who's actually our receiver. So it is also explained in the video kung gaano ka-importante yung ating tinatawag na organizational communication. Now, I have sent the platform, also the PDF form in your GC for further details. I have also sent in your LMS, and at the same time, I will be sending the quiz for your organizational introduction to organizational communication. And I just want to remind you all that we'll be using this time the Google Classroom, the group chat in our messenger where you can put all your points there, yung mga PDF na isisend ko kasi para mas madali din na ma-access ng iba. Because I have found out that it's really hard for you to access when it comes to the use of your tinatawag nating LMS. So I hope that you understood regarding the definition of the organization, the communication, and the organizational communication. It only means to say that the organization and communication do really go with each other to make it a good definition of what is really an organizational communication. Okay, so thank you very much for coming, and I hope that you have actually you can view this one, you can review this one because I'll be uploading this one in YouTube, and you can also access the YouTube, the link that I'll be sending to you. So if you do have questions regarding the discussion, then you may also raise that one in our messenger. I prefer the messenger in our group chat so I can easily address, especially to everyone. So thank you very much, and that's all for today. See you next meeting. Bye.